and take up any other questions
Yeah.
outside of the session.
I won't be looking at the chat while I'm presenting because I can't multitask.
Yep, I know the feeling. I know the feeling. I will keep an eye on the chat for you, and certainly if we have time at the end of your presentation, and if there's any questions on there, if we've got time to address those, I can ask those for you.
Do you happen to know if there is any keyboard shortcut to move the slides forward?
I don't. I'm afraid I'm not that great with Teams yet, but when I gave my presentation earlier this morning, I just used the arrows at the top of the screen. So you can take control of your presentation. You should see the take control button at the
Yeah,
top.
I've already taken control, and now the arrows are below the slide. So I think that will work. Yes, it does.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've started the recording now, so I think without further ado, Michel, I will hand over to you for the first presentation this afternoon.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thanks for attending. Oli and I will explain how we're producing M269 outside the VLE. The rest of the team are Anne Walsh, Alexis Lansbury, Brendan Quinn, and Jane Evans. So M269 started some years ago and is due for an update. Currently, students ping-pong between reading online units and printed books. So to do the activities which are on the VLE, they also must load separate files in a separate code editor. And there are very few problem-solving activities. We're going to address these issues in part by using a single medium for the whole module, Jupyter Notebooks. So in Jupyter, the code editor is embedded in a notebook, and students can read the materials and work through them in the same medium, a bit like Khan Academy. And so this eliminates the overhead of switching media and lowers the barrier to practice. Notebooks are not supported by the VLE, so that's why we're producing M269 differently. Jupyter is a computational environment that works inside a web browser. The interface is in the form of a notebook with so-called text and code cells. Jupyter is widely used by professionals and in education, including the OU. The difference is that M269 will use Jupyter only, and so the textbook will become also the workbook. All the code and text in Jupyter Notebooks is editable, and so students can apply the errata, they can add study notes, they can change and experiment with our code, and they can add alternative solutions. At the end of M269, each student will have their unique personal book. Moreover, notebooks can also be presented as slides in tutorials. This is how a notebook looks like. The gray rectangle is a code cell with the output directly below it. In this case, the code generates an image, and because of the multimedia nature of Jupyter, the output could also be a sound, a table, a diagram, or even simply text. As you can see, the syntax of the code is highlighted in color. That's not possible in the VLE, where the code is really just black monospaced text that can't be neither edited nor executed. And so, to sum all up what I've said so far, Jupyter really provides a better, more integrated learning experience. The text cells are written in Markdown, which is a very simple formatting system. So this slide is basically showing about 90% of what Markdown can do. You can also include some images and little more. It's the bare necessities, but it covers what we need. And the main reason for Markdown's popularity is its ease of use. So this is the text cell that renders as in the previous slide. And just by reading this, you can figure out how Markdown works. So you put text between asterisks to get bold, you use vertical bars to separate columns, and you put code between triple backticks. The PY there indicates that it's Python code, so that the correct syntax coloring is applied automatically. So I hope you agree this is much faster to write than Word or HTML or, heaven forbid, XML. So you and the students can really focus on the content and not the format. And another advantage is that it prevents the spacing in code, which is crucial to be correct, to be messed up during the formatting. Unfortunately, Jupyter has a very basic Markdown editor. And so it's okay for writing a few paragraphs in a notebook, but it's really cumbersome to write a book with hundreds of pages. So I'm using Atom, which is one of the many free and good Markdown editors. In addition, I've written a script that generates the notebooks from the Markdown source. So for example, the script, when it comes across three backticks, it will start a new code cell or it will finish the current one. The script also automatically runs all the code in all the notebooks. And this guarantees that all the outputs are consistent with the code that I've written. The script also extracts all Python code from the notebooks into separate files. And this is for students who, for some reason, prefer or can't use Jupyter and prefer a traditional code editor. After generating the notebooks, the script automatically uses the free NBSphinx tool to produce alternative formats, HTML and PDF. Finally, the script puts all the files into a zip archive, which I then upload to the VLE. So if you go to the Learn2 website and you search for M269-NE, which stands for New Edition, then you can get the zip archive from the Resources tab. So as you can see, the key to the process is automation. So the navigation links between the notebooks, the section and the exercise numbers, and the cross-reference links, they are all automatically generated, and this avoids errors. With automated scripts, you also don't have to write the text in the same order as it will appear in the book. So for example, after each exercise, I immediately write the hint and the solution to that exercise, and it makes it easier to edit everything consistently. And it's then the script that separates the hints and the answers, puts them at the back of the book, and automatically puts a link in the exercise to the corresponding hint and answer. This is how the HTML looks like. So it's just the content without any distractors around, unlike the VLE. There's a search box, there's a collapsible and expandable full table of contents. And in the VLE, you only get this per unit, not for the whole module. This is how the PDF looks like in a PDF reader. Again, a fully navigable table of contents, and you don't get this in the PDFs produced by LDS. To keep our sets under proper version control, and SharePoint is not proper version control, we use GitHub, which is the world's largest repository of open source and proprietary software. So if it's good enough for large software projects, it's definitely good enough for module production. So with GitHub, we know exactly who changed what, when, and why, because every change has to be described. So there is no more emailing around of Word files with version numbers and author initials, none of that faff. We can revert to any previous state of the repository, and we can make snapshots of the repository, and we do that to pass on to LDS for them to back up in their system. So when I've written a chapter, then Jonathan Darch, who is our editor, he makes a copy of the repository, he does his edits, and then he submits a request for me to pull in his changes. And GitHub will compute all the differences between his and my version for me to approve. So you don't have to remember to turn track changes on, and you can't selectively hide changes. The system detects everything for you. As for critical readers, well, they can write and add Markdown files with their comments directly in the web interface with that Add File button and put them in a feedback folder. The repositories in GitHub, they can have various branches, and this allows people to work in parallel without overriding each other's files. A big advantage of GitHub is that it renders the notebooks in read-only mode. So the critical readers can read the material directly on GitHub without the faff of downloading notebooks and then launching Jupyter. Each repository has an issue tracker. So we use it to note problems, to assign issues to people, and to discuss them. And so this keeps the knowledge for future presentation teams in one place instead of individual mailboxes. Each repository also has a wiki, which in this case I use to document the authoring, critical reading, and the editing process. And again, it's for future presentation teams to know how to make changes using my script and GitHub. And so now it's over to Oli. Hello, Oli.
Sorry, I'm being very old-fashioned and not unmuting myself. So early on, there's some concerns raised within the module team about the cognitive load on students of having to swap between different documents and different files and programs during the TMAs. It was increasing the load, and it was increasing stress upon the students. So we made the decision to actually carry out the TMAs in the same format as the books by using Jupyter Notebooks. And the idea was that the technology of having to run separate programs and paste codes into different places was more than we needed. It was blocking rather than making things easier. So we made the decision to limit the TMA parts to single documents, all within Jupyter Notebooks, and to actually use the technology to reduce the load on students, not just by keeping everything within a single document, but also by doing things like color coding and identifying answer boxes for the students where possible as well. As I previously mentioned, and as Michel mentioned as well, TMAs have multiple files in the current edition, and similarly with when you're producing things, there's multiple copies of documents being emailed around and shared online, and this all brings potential for errors to be introduced. So with everything becoming desynchronized, we could have one person fixing something that somebody else fixes as well. We could have something which is fixed in potentially an AL version of the document, which isn't then shared with students. And we didn't want that to be an issue. So as well as actually making things a bit easier for students to deal with, we hope the new method also reduces the source of errors by having just a single file for everything. And when I say reducing load, we also want to try and reduce load on the ALs as well by using marking. So we're reducing the number of files that they have to deal with. They don't have separate code files, don't have separate test files. Everything is within that one Jupyter notebook. There's no reliance on test files being named exactly so, and one little difference in a file name could mean a test file doesn't run, and it can cause a lot of confusion. Everything's integrated, so the automated tests within Jupyter notebooks can be run simply by the AL pressing the run button. That will run all the tests and give them the results, all within that one document. And also the feedback boxes and the tutor notes are all color coded, so it's really simple for ALs and for the students to see what they're looking at and what it means, what's for them, what's being produced for them, where they have to write something. Just trying to really reduce that cognitive load. I've got a question there from Kay Sim. I'll come back to that at the end if that's all right, because I want to try and deal with all questions in one go. So the method is fairly simple, and again, looks like Michel, we edit in Markdown. We have some scripts which are producing for us. So we produce a single full document which has got the questions, the answers, the suggested feedback, the tutor notes, all created in a single Markdown file. We have a script that then builds the full document into a master Jupyter notebook. We have a second script that then splits that notebook, that single, hopefully correct document. It will be split into versions which are suitable for the students and versions which are suitable for the ALs. But it comes from the same source file, so everything we've written, if we correct it once, it's corrected everywhere once reproduced. And then once students actually submit that script, we have when students submit their work, we have a third script which we're working on, which then we'll put feedback boxes in, so that which are again color coded, which makes it a lot easier, hopefully, for the ALs to provide their feedback and their marks in a way which is appropriate for them and just a lot easier and simpler for them. So I've got a couple of screenshots before we finish off, which I'm going to share. But I do want to just put out the proviso that this is still under development. So we're still working on this. We're still consulting with some ALs. We still want to, we're willing to make changes as and where we feel it's appropriate. So the AL version, we've got the question, so they know what they're talking about. Again, we can remove that if it makes sense. We've got this catching pink colour, which again could be changed very easily if we want to, which has got the marking guidance and the solution for the for them to look at to be able to then pass on to the student where relevant. The student version has got these again fetching lemon yellow boxes, which is an answer box, and again we can change colours, we can put titles in if we so wish, but when students look through these documents, it's very clear that the white box is information and the pale yellow box is where they need to write their answers. And finally, the merged version, and again it's under development. We can remove or add what the ALs particularly want when we get through to actually putting this into a final version. But at the moment, it produces the students' version, which will be in yellow, what the student's written. The pink version, which is the guidance and the solutions, if you like, or anything else the tutors might need to mark it. And then a nice blue box for them to write their feedback into. And again, we can remove the marking guidance afterwards if we want to, so that we don't give the model answers or whatever to the students if we want to just give them specific things. So we can adjust this quite easily due to the fact that it's all playing with a single source file, a single markdown file, which gives us plenty of flexibility.
4 minutes left. Sorry.
4 minutes left. Wow.
Yeah.
Plenty of time for questions. Excellent. Because we have no conclusions. So conclusions which certainly Michel and I both feel are very important that we've learned from this process is automation. If you want to be agile, automation is absolutely key. By automating things, we're able to focus on what's important for a human being to do. Proper version control, and while Word does an amazingly clever job of tracking, it doesn't necessarily do an effective job of tracking version control, as myself and my colleague Brendan found out yesterday when I was missing things because it was subtly highlighted in purple with nothing else attached to it. Markdown enables us to focus on content. We're not worrying about necessarily making things look pretty. We're making things look effective, and then we can focus on other things through the automation. And something I know Michel feels very strongly about, that interactive textbooks should be using Jupyter notebooks. And I'll end by saying thank you, which is our final slide. Thank you. And I suppose we'll be moving to questions, unless anybody, Michel, do you want to add any final points, or should we just go straight to questions?
No, nothing from me. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, we've got 3 minutes.
Excellent. Thank you for the claps. So I'll answer the first question, which was from. So I don't. Is it Kate Sim? You don't need to be online to mark. So although it runs in a web browser, runs in a web browser which has got local software running behind it, which is comes from Anaconda, the Jupyter server. So you can do it completely offline. You could, theoretically be in a cave with no internet access. As long as you've got the work downloads onto your computer, you can work wherever you are. Question from, is it Sarah Dawes? Will the test be visible to students, or will there be extra hidden ones somehow? Yes, much like the current M269, we will have some tests for students to run against their code, and then we'll have extra ones that they don't get to see. So I don't know.
So there is two questions from Kate about marking online and marking and no escape from screen. So the students, I mean, they have a PDF. So if they prefer to print it, by all means, and study there, read there, and then do the exercises in the notebook. So that can be done. And no, the marking doesn't have to be online. So everything can be done locally in your Jupyter installation. And so no internet connection needed.
Regarding the colours, we haven't checked them yet. As I say, we're still in the development phase. However, we're trying to keep things as similar to previous modules that we've seen and previous things as well. but we will be going obviously through that as we go through part of our quality assurance. It's a 6-digit code to change the colour, so we can change the colour to anything we want. We could even allow students to change the colours themselves if that's easier. I'm just flicking through to see anything else that we need to pick up on there.
I think we've got time. Oh, sorry, guys. We've got time for one final question. Mark Jones has asked there about option B for running Jupyter, an OU server-based approach.
Yeah, so we are currently asking for money for SSU to buy the hardware and then maintain the server. So it will be very similar as to how TM351 is doing now, where there is a server here at the OU, and all the notebooks will be pre-installed, and so the students just log on and work directly on the server.
Alvaro's raised the query as well regarding changing fonts. All of the way things look is based on a CSS file, which sits along with Jupyter, and it can all be customized. So it's really simple to do that for accessibility or any other reasons as well.
Okay, I think we better.
And then everyone talk about caves.
Yeah. I think we better move on to the next presentation, but thank you, Michel. Thank you, Oli, for a very informative presentation. It's always useful to see something a little bit different, especially, I mean, I work in science, so this is the first time I've seen anything like this outside of the VLE, so that was particularly interesting. Okay. So I think we've had our next presentation loaded up now, so thank you, Nicola, and I will hand over to Katja.
Yeah, hello, I'm Katja Rietdorf. I'm a lecturer in biology and co-chair on the science module S294, which is cell biology. And I'm going to talk about data interpretation skill support we are giving in S294. So it's a very brief overview of the module. It's a 30-credit module. It's compulsory for natural sciences and biology students, and it does have a relatively low pass rate and is known for that. So overall 60.7% in 19J. It used to be compulsory for Q71 students and still is in this current presentation, but the Q71 students will have an alternative from the next presentation onwards. Brief overview over the assessment. There are 3 formative TMAs, TMA 1, 2, and 3, which are taking place in November, January, and March. They have short answer questions. TMA 2 and 3 have data interpretation questions, and all of them have an essay and questions on a scene article. The exam itself, or the formative assessment, is TMA 04, which is 25% of the module result, which has a collaborative activity and includes the essay. And then 75% are made up by short answer questions, by data interpretation, and by questions on an article the students have seen before. So I've highlighted the data interpretation because we do know from talking to the tutors and from student feedback that the students think they're struggling with the data interpretation. And there's no specific training built into the module for data interpretation. So training is done via the tutor group tutorials, via module-wide tutorials, via revision tutorials, and via the 2 data interpretation questions in the formative TMAs. So seeing that the students find data interpretation difficult, we introduced some novel resources in the 19J presentation. We first produced an Adobe Connect recording, plus a transcript and PowerPoint, and I'm going to show you some examples of that later. It talks about the basics of data interpretation. What are data? How do you deal with data? How do you interpret data? So the students had access from that since March, before TMA 03 was due. And then we developed a Moodle quiz that the students can use for revision and can test the data interpretation skills themselves. And that was available during the revision for the exam just before TMA 04 was submitted. I'm going to present you some data on what effect these resources have. And I just want to give you an overview of how I've done this analysis. I've only used students from the 19J presentation because that's when we included these resources. I'm comparing the responses in the data interpretation questions for TMA 02 and for the exam. And I've ranked the students on where within the scale of data interpretation scores they got for those two instances. So a student who was getting very low number of marks and was very low ranking students in the overall ranking of how students answered the DI would get a low ranking in TMAO2, and I was checking, did this ranking improve in the exam? And did the average score of the data interpretations question improve between TMAO2 and the exam? And I compared the module results, and I compared students taking up either of these resources or students who haven't used the resources. Because we made the Adobe Connect recording available in time for TMAO3, I also compared the improvements or the changes between TMAO3 and TMAO2 data interpretation scores for students who did or did not access the Adobe Connect recording before the TMA deadline. So is there an immediate effect of accessing this resource? So just a few examples of how this resource looks like. It's a Adobe Connect recording that one of the tutors recorded. We also have a transcript, and we've got the PowerPoint slides that go with the recording. Here are a couple of screenshots as an example. So we're explaining what types of data are out there, how you can analyze them. We go through how can you present your data. So we've got one table with data, and we show scatter plots, we show line graphs or bar charts. So students get an idea of how do you present data and how do you interpret data. This data Adobe Connect recording was accessed by 122 students. So about 30% of the students who took the exam did access the Adobe Connect recording. And all this analysis I'm going to show you are only students who did submit the exam. If we look at the module results, the students who accessed the Adobe Connect recording, shown in black, had a better module result than students not accessing the recording. So the lower mark is a better, the lower bar is a better result. And if we look at the DI score they got in the exam, we find that the students accessing the Adobe Connect recording had a higher score in the exam. So overall, it seems that students accessing the Adobe Connect recording performed better in the data interpretation. But we didn't know whether the students actually improved their data interpretation skills by accessing the recording. So that's where the ranking I mentioned earlier comes in. And I was checking how students, in what rank, how good were students in the data interpretation question in TMAO2 and in the exam, and whether or not the students access the Adobe Connect recording, there wasn't really a difference in how well they did or what position they had in the data interpretation for the exam. But because the Adobe Connect resource was given just before TMAO3, I distinguished students who accessed the resource before TMAO3 was due, so who made use of it in answering questions in TMAO3 and those who didn't. And in green, you've got students who did access the Adobe Connect resource, and they scored approximately the same in the data interpretation in TMAO2 and TMAO3, while students not accessing this Adobe Connect resource before TMAO3 was due had a slight decline in their marks. So there could be a benefit, or there's a slight benefit in accessing the Adobe Connect resource. We can't say whether that is due to the effect of the resource or whether stronger students are actually taking up the resource. So summarize for that part, we've got a slightly better performance of students who access the Adobe Connect recording. We don't have an overall effect for the exam. And the improvements we've seen could be caused by stronger students accessing the Adobe Connect resource. As I said, we also had a second resource. We have Moodle quizzes. There were 18 questions, and there are various different types of questions that are representative of what we're asking in the exam. And you've got 3 screenshots here for different types of these questions that the students could use. And I've analyzed them in the same way as I showed you for the Adobe Connect recording. We've got 128 students, so again, just over 32% of the students taking the exam, taking up the opportunity for the quizzes. The students taking up the quiz have on average a better module result than the students not taking up the Moodle quizzes. So the average grade is 2.0 compared to 2.6. And they scored on average 10% better in the DI in the exam question. So overall, the Moodle quiz access seems to improve the module result and the score in the data interpretation. And again, the question, did the students improve their DI skills or did they just do better overall? Again, I compared the ranking of the students, and in red, you've got the students who did not access the DI resource. No, you've got, sorry. You do see an improvement in the ranking for students who did access the quiz, shown on the left-hand side, while students who didn't access the quiz don't change their ranking. So they've got a certain quality of answering the data interpretation question, but they didn't really improve between the time when no resource was available and the resources were available. So overall, students taking the quiz improved the ranking in the DI question. The biggest improvement we have seen when looking into the data in more detail are students who are getting a grade 1 and who are getting a grade 3. So there seems to be something about strong students taking up the resource, interacting with the resource, and becoming even better in answering this type of questions. It's interesting to see that there were a few students who actually failed overall, but who improved their data interpretation skills a lot. So who scored hardly any marks in the data interpretation in TMAO2, but who did relatively well in the data interpretation in the main exam. Because there are only a couple of these students, we can't make any conclusions about it, but it seems that there might be a group of students who try to pass the exam by specifically targeting the data interpretation question, because these students also did not show an improved mark in the article question, whereas otherwise we quite often saw an improve in marks in general. So complete conclusions, using the Adobe Connect recording and or the quiz improves the exam scores for data interpretation and the module result. Accessing the Adobe Connect recording alone did not really improve the scores in the data interpretation question a lot. Engaging with the quiz improves the scores in the data interpretation question. Most students improving in the data interpretation also improved in the article question and to a lower extent in the short answer question. So there's probably also an effect of the students just improving with revision. And a few weak students improved after accessing the quiz, but they weren't enough to make any conclusions about the specific effect on these students. What are the next steps? We definitely want to talk to the tutors on 294 about the effects the data interpretation resources have to encourage students to interact with them. And we need to correlate if the students we have seen are in general stronger students or whether there's any difference in the data interpretation uptake for certain student demographics would be another interesting follow-on question. And I'm leaving to just acknowledge the people who helped me with this project: Jane Laughlin, model team chair Lorraine Waters, and Patricia Aldred, who did the Adobe Connect recording. Everybody who helped me to get the data I needed for analyzing, and the module team, the ALs, and so forth and so on. and you for listening.
Thank you very much, Katja. Finished in good time there. We've got 6 minutes for questions if anybody would like to ask anything. Would anyone like to ask a question directly? If not, there's a few comments in the chat box as well.
Yeah, I couldn't follow those, so I saw the chat box was moving fast, but
I think Kate's raised an interesting point there. Kate saying, if we're concerned that the additional resources are mainly engaged with the stronger students, can we separate that cohort and see an improvement in tier results over historical predicted results?
I want to do that. I would love to do it. I did not have that data available. I've asked for the results our students had in previous presentations or in level 1 modules that will lead into this module. And once I've got those, I will correlate whether there's a difference in stronger students and weaker students. I think the total numbers we have will be large enough to make the distinguishing and still be able to say something, but we don't have the data yet. And I'm also interested in talking to Martin, who mentioned earlier that he might be able to help with the predictions to group the students and to make better statements about who benefits from these resources.
Do you have any insight into the particular students that are engaging with these data interpretation resources? Because I'm thinking, I attended your talk earlier about the early start resources.
Yeah.
Do you have any inkling as to whether it's the same students that are engaging again with this additional resource?
I haven't asked the question, but I've got the spreadsheet to answer the question. They're both in the same spreadsheet, so I can pull the answer out. I just haven't done it yet.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Would anyone like to ask a question? I can't see any hands up. Anybody else at all? Oh, I can see a hand. I can't see whose hand it is, I'm afraid.
It may be mine.
Brendan, yes.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion in the chat box, Katja, while you were bravely struggling to ignore it, about the direction of, the correlation versus causality in your data. Yeah. So, and we've sort of touched on it slightly, but it's just, I think we find it in lots of situations where the strong students take advantage of stuff and the weak students don't. And so is there any evidence that it's the things they're taking advantage of that cause them to do well, or are they just good students who do well and they tend to turn up to tutorials, take advantage of extra resources and so on, and then continue to do well? So that's, have you got evidence, or are you able to get that evidence really?
I think it's hard. It's difficult to get the hard evidence just because what I see is correlations. I compare two performances, but whether one is really affecting the other one, I don't know. I think this comparing what rank the students are and distinguishing between the ones who did or did not interact with the Adobe Connect recording just before they did TMA or 3 does show that there's an effect. I have actually here done the breakdown of the quiz by module result. So where you've got the few significances on the left-hand side, the blue marks or blue dots are students who would get a first grade and they improve more. The students getting a third are probably not the students which we would call normally the strong students, and they did improve. I think overall, from remembering back how the data looked like, these students will also improve in the answering of the article. So there's a certain amount of just revision helping them.
So probably sort of suggestive information and not conclusive, and probably further work needed, I think it sounds like, yeah.
Yeah, but
yeah, it's great. Yeah, thank you very much.
That the green ones here who got a third grade did improve means it's not only the strong students improving. So there's a hint for it, but I wouldn't be able to put money on it.
Yeah. No, it was very interesting work anyway. It's always hard to be sure how much of an effect a thing has, and it's not just in this, in every situation where we do something like that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, if there's no more questions, then perhaps we can move on to the final presentation. But thank you, Katja, for your presentation this afternoon. That was very interesting. So that just leaves us with our final talk for this parallel session this afternoon. And over to yourself, Ben.
Oh, thank you very much. So I'm going to give a very brief overview of the Mathematics Online project, reflecting after 10 years. And can I just check that the slides are moving forward for you? They are for me.
Yes, yep.
Excellent. Well, the Mathematics Online project, otherwise known as MOLE, was a 3-year project based in maths and stats, but also working with colleagues in computing technology and science. It worked very closely with the CETLs, the Centres for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, in particular COMPST, led by Steve Swithenby, and PyCettle, led by Bob Lambourne. And it was supported, this work, by professional staff, Catherine Rubin, Diane Ford, who I think is still working with us in Esteem, and Barbara Poniatowska. And it was brought me to the OU. I had been up in Scotland, and I came to the OU in order to be the academic leader of this project. And it was a very exciting time for all of us, I think. So here's the team. Actually, this is from a publication that came out of the team. And it's got Tim, who you probably know very well, gave a talk just a few minutes ago, and Gaynor Arrowsmith, who's giving a talk, I think, in another session, or is associated with the talk. And we also, there's Chris Rowley was a member of the team, and also Camilla Jordan is pictured here. She wasn't a member of the team, but she worked very closely with us, as did Gareth Williams. And there were many, many associate lecturers, colleagues and students who worked with us during this time. So what was the purpose? And I'm using slides from the time, by the way. These are resurrected slides. So the purpose was to look at various challenges for not just mathematics, but what we called symbolically rich disciplines. That included music, as we used to say, as well as sciences. So we were interested in electronic submission and human marking of assignments. That was one of our key things. We were interested in using web-based materials generally, e-assessment, by which I mean computer marked assessment, but using computer algebra to deal with the mathematics. Also, we were interested in online lectures and tutorials using Illuminate, and we indeed experimented with Illuminate before the university adopted that as its standard. So we also were interested in student forums and that sort of thing. So here is a slide from a talk that I gave actually at a joint meeting of the British Mathematical Colloquium and the Irish Mathematical Society in 2009, and it was one of the publications that came out of our work about teaching maths with online tutorials. And here are some slides from that talk. So first of all, I introduced the purpose of the MOLE trial, and here's a picture of Gareth, and this was one of our early experiments in teaching with Illuminate. This is not actually a real session, it's a practice session, in fact, that's shown here. But we wanted to know how good Illuminate Live was to teach mathematics, how we could make best use of the tools, how could the tools be improved, and we did a lot of extensive work involving about 30 ALs, and we had about over 400 student responses. That more, some students responded more than once, so there were fewer than that students, but basically that order of magnitude. And we covered quite a few courses. I've listed some of them there. But it went from the level 1 through to the master's program, and covered not just mathematics, so that was the principal focus, but also covered science, computer science and technology. So here's a slide from then. This was actually what the students thought. We're talking way back in 2008, something like that. There are both student and staff evaluations here, and you can see they liked Illuminate as a overall learning experience. 3 is more or less neutral here in this slide, and for convenience, not so much for interaction. But they thought it was essentially an effective tool, even as effective as face-to-face. So encouraged by that, we moved on. Here are the student positive comments. Quite interesting. They liked the interaction. Remember, this was when students didn't really have much interaction with their tutors other than over the phone or maybe by correspondence. They liked the convenience. They liked being able to contact their tutor. So they were very positive about their experience. What were their negative points? Well, believe it or not, their negative points were sound problems, including echo, connection problems. And I always say this, but a lot of the students, when we asked them what they thought was negative about their experience, wrote nothing. So I take that as a positive. But of course, the point I'd like to make here is that the sound problems and the connection problems are still with us. When we had an online session for the Mathematics MNC back in January 2021, these were the problems that the students encountered with Adobe Connect. So nothing has changed really in that respect. What's happened in 2021? So if we take this particular strand and look where we are 10 years later, more or less 10 years later, first of all, online tutorials are ubiquitous within STEM. There's no question about that. We've moved through various incarnations of our system, from Illuminate Live to Blackboard Collaborate, or whatever it was called, OU Live, to Adobe Connect. Who knows what the future will hold? Maybe it will be MS Teams we're using at the moment, or maybe Zoom. But we've gone through various incarnations, as I said. The tablets are in fact the method that enables us to use symbolically rich disciplines and to teach symbolically rich disciplines. But it's not the tablets we used, which were rather bulky. There's a picture of a sort of tablet we used at the time. But we did pave the way. And one of the points I think it's my main take-home message is that the work that we did at that time actually paved the way for a relatively seamless move to all online teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact is that it was done so easily within mathematics and statistics and within STEM more generally was because of the work that had been done over the previous 10 years. So what about electronic marking by humans? So the university had its ETMA system already, but mathematics and statistics wasn't really using it. And we wanted to find a way to enable electronic marking to take place. And our philosophy was that we should enable the student to produce their electronic assignment in whatever way was convenient for them. So that might be in LaTeX, or it might be in Word, or they might actually produce it on paper and scan it, or they might use some whizzy little pen in order to do it. But the point is, it was up to us to convert whatever they produced into a form that could be marked. And we had a preprocessor that actually sat for many years on a laptop in Tim Lowe's office. And that pre-processed all the work that the students did and sent it to the OU ETMA system, which was then marked by the tutor and returned in the normal way as a PDF file from by the OU ETMA system. And the tutor, they either annotated with some sort of PDF annotation software, or quite a few people annotated with Word. So let's have a look at some examples. This was a practice example we produced at the time using Word. We were interested in Word particularly because it had just developed a very good mathematics editor, much better than the previous one, which is still with us actually. It's still very good. But in fact, in the end, most people ended up doing annotation by hand as the most efficient way of doing things. This is some work that was done. I'm not going to highlight many of our AL collaborators, but this particular work I thought was excellent, and I wanted to highlight it, of the sort of annotation that was done at the time of mathematics. And it's still going on, by the way. I think I should mention that I was contacted just before I was going to give this talk by Jim Williamson, one of our ALs who took part in the trial that we had back in the late 2000s. And he's still developing his system, and it was originally for the Macintosh, and it's now going to be for Windows 10, I think, and he'd like some volunteers to help try it out. So if you'd like to contact him, his email is j.h.williamson@open.ac.uk. I'm sure he'd be very pleased to hear from you. So electronic marking, where are we in 2021? Well, of course, ETMAs are fully embedded in the maths and stats modules and more widely within STEM. The old MOL ETMA system is no longer needed as the conversion tools are readily available on the web, actually, so we don't need to do that anymore. And the particular experimentation with Word is not used by many ALs. It's mainly PDF annotation. Students can still submit their TMAs by paper, at least up until this current presentation they can, but most of them don't. It's a very small minority who do. But again, I stress the fact that we did this work on electronic marking enabled us to very easily provide the mechanism for remote examinations in 2020 during the COVID-19 crisis. It's because of this work that we were able to do it so easily. Prescient it was not. We had no idea, of course, about COVID, but nonetheless, it just happened to be fortuitous that the work was very useful. So now I'm going to talk a bit about e-assessment, in other words, computer algebra-based assessment. And so that was a key part of the MOLS program, which was developed by Tim Lowe principally. The OU already had its bespoke open mark system, which many of you know, and it was actually very good. But it wasn't particularly good for mathematics, and it wasn't that easy to author. I think that was our major problem with it. We considered various systems, including some abroad, one in Kentucky, I seem to remember. You've probably never heard of most of these systems, except perhaps the last. Stack, which is the one that was actually adopted, and we quickly realized that this had all the features we wanted. It was versatile, it was scalable, and it was relatively easily authorable. I put this quote from Macbeth here because we weren't to know what the future would bring, and the difficulty of predicting the future, of course, it is still with us, but we managed to get the right call, actually, both on Illuminate and also on Stack. Stack, in fact, let me show you some work. So first of all, this is OpenMark. This is something that Phil Butcher, who is a great champion of e-assessment, he did a lot of work with OpenMark. This is one of his slides. And then this is some early work by Tim Lowe using the Stack system. It looks like it was, produced last year. And one of the great things is that the work we did in experimenting with Stack actually fed into the development of Stack by the guy at Birmingham, who's now at Edinburgh, who developed it originally. So here's what a Stack question looks like now. This is actually from one of my own modules from M820, Calculus of Variations. This is a particular question in that module. This is an MSc module. So it looks a bit more swish than it did back in 2008, but the functionality is better, but it's basically the same system in essence. This is a great slide. This is from a talk I gave actually 2 years ago, in which I celebrated the fact that Chris Sangwin, who developed Stack, who's, as I said, at the University of Edinburgh as a professor, and the two Tims, as I call them, the Tim Lowe and Tim Hunt, who were actually instrumental in developing Stack at the Open University. It is in 2018, 1 million Stack questions were produced annually. I asked Tim Hunt a few days ago what the current figure was, and he told me it was 1.3 million. So actually, it's an extraordinary and large amount of questions that are accessed by students. And I have to say that that's probably been the most successful of all the things that we experimented with in the MOL project. So now I'm aware that we're coming to the end, so I'm going to just give my own personal reflection. Interestingly, this is a reflection I gave 7 years ago when I applied for a senior fellowship of the HEA. I obviously use MOL as one of the strands of work that I wanted to present as evidence. And I was sort of slightly equivocal at the time, I think, that it was obviously very important, but still there was a lot of work that needed to be done. I think in those 7 years, a lot of that work has been done, not by me, I hasten to add, but by other people within the university. And I'd say that looking back, everything I think has more or less come into place. And as I said before, it was great that we were able to make these transitions to online teaching and assessment so easily. So I'm going to thank you for listening and stop in a moment. This is, of course, a picture of a gravestone, but with some hope for the future, if you read the inscription. One of the great things I think we did in Mole was we weren't too serious at the same time as doing serious work. So we were always looking for examples of Mole from the internet. And this is one which I think is particularly apt for me to give an overview of the project 10 years on. And so then I'll stop and take any questions.
Thank you, Ben. Does anybody have any questions? I can't see anything in the chat box. I've scrolled back up. Would anybody like to ask anything? See some emoticon applause there for you, Ben.
It's okay. It's tea time. I've given enough talks in the graveyard slot, although it's not quite the graveyard slot because we have a keynote panel discussion, don't we, coming up.
Would anybody like to take this opportunity to ask something? If not, I could ask a very general question, Ben, in that obviously you've reflected now back on the last 10 years, but where do you see the next 10 years going?
Well, in terms of electronic delivery, well, I believe the Open University will seize the opportunity that is presented by the current crisis, and I use those words because one does take advantage of a crisis, however bad the crisis is, to actually become fully online. That's what I believe the university will do. I'm not necessarily advocating it because I'm a strong believer in face-to-face interaction in the right context, but I believe that the university will become fully online in all its aspects. So, for example, in terms of exams, I do not believe that we will go back to normal sit-down exams, although my own MSc students, if you like, they are actually, by and large, there's a small majority in favour of going back to normal exams, but I don't believe the university will. I think we will actually seize the opportunity to go fully online. People may disagree with me, but that's what I think will happen.
And in fact, I think that's going to be the subject of the final panel discussion, looking at the agenda here about how sort of we're going to be moving forward sort of post-pandemic. Would anyone else like to ask anything? Anybody else at all? If not, we can finish 4 minutes early if nobody else has got any questions for Ben.
I think tea is a great idea.
But thank you, Ben, and thank you to all of our speakers at this parallel session this afternoon. We have some virtual applause. There we are. But I think we are back in the plenary room at 3 o'clock. So thanks again, everybody.